So we left off looking at age structure diagrams, these pyramids, and they give us a lot of information based on these different age cohorts that exist there. Okay. And so we can see these baby booms. And so this looks in the US. I'm sure we've all heard the term baby boomers. After World War II ended, all the men came back and started making tons of babies. And so what we see is we get this cohort within these age structure diagrams that's wider than the cohorts below it. And this can have various impacts long range. And so, what we really look at is as these individuals retire and enter, start needing care and help, there's more of them than the cohorts below them. And so, are there going to be enough people to support these individuals of this larger cohort? Okay. And so with this age structure, we're looking at the number of individuals in each of these age categories. As I stated when we looked at those diagrams, we've got pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive. The pre and reproductive groups are the reproductive base. These are the individuals that can or will add to the population as time goes on. Those that are post-reproductive, they can't make babies anymore. They're done. They're not part of the reproductive base. Okay. So when we look at these age structure diagrams, it gives us an idea of growth rate. So we can look at China, India, and the US, and our age structure diagrams are all different in each of these. We see that a third of the world population is in a broad pre-reproductive base. What this means is that because we have so many individual pre-reproductive, as time goes on, we're going to be adding more and more and more people to the population, which is why when we look at the world being at 7.8 billion and the UN saying in 2050 we'll be at 10 billion, it's by looking at these pre-reproductive bases that exist globally. And we can get estimates as to how many people are going to be added. So as we see here, even if the total fertility rate declines to replacement level worldwide, which is about 2.1 children per couple, the 0.1 because of mortality and things like that before adulthood, we will still see an increase in population. Okay, we can't just stop at 7.7 billion because then either most of the world isn't having children anymore or we're killing people. And that's something that Hans Rosling will say in his video, which another one of his videos that'll be posted in a little bit. So we look at China and we've got our pre-reproductive in green, reproductive in blue. Red is post-reproductive. We'll see this in the next three that we look at. And we've got a pretty broad reproductive base here. Okay, it's pretty wide up to about in the 60. I believe this is in millions. And so lots of individuals in these reproductive, but really not getting bigger down here. Okay, and we see that China's one-child policy was relatively effective. It is now 2 children per family as their policy. And they're pretty much at that replacement value now. Okay, so any growth that we see in China is going to mostly be because these individuals are getting older and filling up this area here. Hans Rosling refers to this as the fill up of adults. And so we see that China is already slowing down in its population growth. Okay, they will not be the largest populated country for much longer. This is a graph of a country that is exploding in population. India will very quickly overtake China. We see this very large reproductive base and pre-reproductive here. And even if they hit replacement value, right, we're going to fill up all of this area with millions, maybe a whole nother billion individuals. Okay, not a lot in this post-reproductive. Most individuals down here, very fast growth. Okay, and so we're going to be adding hundreds of millions in India in the next 20 to 30 years. This graph right here, and Hans Rosling will talk about Africa, is where we're going to get most of the next 2 billion people that are going to be added to the world population in the next 30 years. Africa are going to be in these very broad reproductive bases, adding individuals as these individuals hit reproductive age, and then these individuals getting older and living longer through things like medicine and better food availability. Here's the United States, as you can see, and now you might say to yourself, "Oh, this is just as wide. We don't have that many people." If you look here on India and China, they're way up at 60 million. We're just at 12. Okay, way smaller population in the United States, and we are not in this triangle shape, right? We are mostly flat up in some areas down here, not as wide as our baby boom in these individuals up here. And then, as usual, you're going to taper off at the top because people die as they get old. And so we see not significant increases in the population within the United States. And this is the Hans Rosling video here. Super interesting. I encourage you to check this one out as well. Okay. So here we look at our demographic transition model. So as countries become developed, things are going to change. So within pre-industrial, birth and death rates are both high. As they transition, death rates decline, birth rate stays up. Industrial nations, birth rate declines. And then post-industrial, sometimes a negative growth rate. And so we see all of this in this graph. Okay. Pre-industrial, we're almost looking at an R-selected strategy. Parents have a lot of children, but a lot of those children don't survive to adulthood. So if they have 6 kids, 2 might make it to adulthood. So they're still at replacement value. And so our population isn't really changing. As we get into this transitional period, okay, we might have better food availability. We might have better medicine. So our death rate goes down pretty sharply. But our births, for the most part, stay pretty high. So now we're having 6 kids and only 4 die, or only 2 die, or only 1 dies. And so we're significantly increasing the population in this transitional stage. Then we get to industrial, and now our birth rate is following the death rate and coming down again. Okay, and by the end of this industrial stage, we're going to hit replacement. And so we've got equal number of births and deaths happening. Our population now is going to stop growing. Then in post-industrial, sometimes our births dip below our deaths. And so we start decreasing in population. And this is happening in countries like Japan, Italy, other developed nations. And part of the reason for this is when you get into more modern countries, developed countries, having children and raising children gets really, really expensive. Okay, and so we see our pre-industrial, a lot of that work is done on their own. They are making and growing and getting that food all themselves. In our post-industrial nations, we go and we pick up our food from a grocery store. We have nothing to do with the production of that food itself. So looking at the change in human populations, how long can we sustain this exponential growth that we're seeing? Now, as I stated before, UN estimates say that we are already decreasing that growth rate, and we will hit about 10 billion, maybe 11 billion at 2050, and then we should be done. If this happens, the human population globally should be okay. If we surpass this carrying capacity, just like the reindeer on St. Matthew Island, we're going to get this overshoot and crash. Density dependent factors kick in, plagues, famines, competition. We're going to get war. All of these things are going to add into this, impacting the human population. Okay? And that is the end of chapter 40.